And then where is share screen? And there, does everyone see the buyer broker agreement on your screen?
Yep.
Those of you driving, Carlton, keep your eyes on the road. We are recording this. You can see it later. Um, I'd mentioned in a previous class that I wanted to sort of like really go back to the basics on some of this stuff and just kind of do a close read of some of the forms because they've changed. Also, the way I talk about the forms with clients tends to be a little different than how some people talk about forms. And, I've been known, I could rock it through all the buyer forms in about 15 minutes kind of thing. Just because, I've gotten into a rhythm with it. Yeah, there was a printing error.
Okay.
I've gotten into a rhythm with it. I have little shortcuts for how to talk about things. So I wanted to model some of that behavior. So if you wanted to take some of, my condensed language and use it for yourself, that's fine. But the main thing that we start with is the buyer broker agreement. We need to have this signed with all buyers at the first substantive conversation about real estate. And that is the law. So what we need to get in the practice of is just like we sit down with sellers for a listing presentation, we need to start sitting down with buyers and having buyer consultations. In the old days, we used to do this. And we used to bring the buyers to the office. Who remembers CITO? Come into the office. We used to have a saying that if a buyer won't come into the office, they're not serious about buying. And we know that's not the case anymore. We have a lot of buyers that they're ready to buy right now. They have a pre-approval letter in hand, and we're going to go show them a house and write an offer. That's just how we've gotten into the rhythm of it in the last few years. But with Zoom and things like that, we really need to have these buyer counseling sessions and explain the forms to them and explain what the exclusive right to represent agreement is, get it signed. And the challenge there is maybe they don't want to sign this with you for an extended period of time just yet. Fine, sign it for one house, right? We're going to go see 123 Sesame Street in Virginia Beach. If you buy this house, I'm representing you. Earn their trust, right? Sign a buyer broker agreement for the next house or for a day or 2 days or the week. If they don't know you and don't trust you yet, then baby steps with them. But this is the new form you have on your screen, and it's also in your email. It's revised as of 02/24. And in this one, I have it sort of pre-filled out just to show you some of the things. So top of the line here, this agreement made on whatever date, and this date here should precede or match your offer, right? If this date is later than your offer date, you're in trouble. Preferably this date should precede because you're having it signed up front early on. Between, this is where the buyer's names go in, and then Long and Foster Real Estate. And we don't put your name because why? The business is with the broker, right? If any of us leave out of here and get run over by a school bus, the business keeps going because Long and Foster owns the business, not the individual agent. And again, that's state law. So the first box describes what they're going to be buying. Some people put an address in here. I've in the past put an address and, or any real property. I just have this pre-filled as any real property. So this says that if they buy a condo, if they buy a piece of land, if they buy a timeshare, whatever real estate is, real property, this is what it qualifies for. And this is a blanket statement, right? They can be shopping in Hampton, they could be shopping in Ivor, they could be buying Carlton's listing up in Carrollton, whatever, this covers you blanket. Term, this agreement shall commence on this date here, should really match this date here or somewhere close to it. So if we're signing it today, March 6th, so we have this agreement is made of March 6th. The term, this agreement commences on March 6th and terminates at midnight on pick a date, right? We don't mandate any specific time period. You could, like I said, you could do it for a day, you could do it for a month, pick a date arbitrarily 6 months into the future, a year, whatever. Just pick a date. If the buyer questions it, just say it's an arbitrary choice. We can change it if you want. Fire me whenever you're ready. I've never held a buyer to you're under buyer broker agreement with me. If they don't want to work with me, I don't want to work with them. So tear it up, off we go. Bye-bye. Broker's duties. Now here's where I get into how I explain this to the buyer. So broker's duties, this basically says, I'm going to help you buy a home and I'm going to coach you through the process. Paragraph 4. Buyer's duties. This means you're going to show up and you're going to buy a home when you say you're going to buy a home, right? You're not going to make any misrepresentations and you're agreeing that you have the ability to buy a home. Compensation. Paragraph 5. This is the big paragraph, right? This is where we need to start having uncomfortable conversations with buyers, right? We've had uncomfortable conversations with sellers before. Remember when we had on the seller's net sheet and listing agreements and things. We also had uncomfortable conversations there. Jan, can you forward the email to Kathy, please, with the forms that we're talking about? And hi, Kathy. So compensation, we need to talk with them about compensation. And this says that we're going to get paid the flat fee, $395, plus 3% of the gross purchase price. And we're gonna get it. This is where the buyer is saying, yes, I'm going to pay you either out of my own pocket or via commission offered in the MLS. So if the MLS is advertising a 3% commission, we're good. If this is on River Road and they're offering a 0 co-broke commission, then we need to have the conversation like, look, I don't work for free. If this is the house for you, you're agreeing to pay me 3% of the purchase price. And the successful part of the conversation that I've had with buyers is, if this is the house for you and we write on it, we'll figure out together the best way to make that 3% happen, right? And this may be where you come in and have a conversation with Tina or with me about how we coach our buyers along and figure out how to make that 3% happen on a reduced co-op commission for a buyer's agent. But they need to understand that there are a number of listings out there on the market that are not offering what we would consider our full fee. And, maybe we say, I can't work for less than 2%. I can't work for less than 2.5%. Trying to get 3%. But they need to know that this is how we get paid and nobody works for free, kind of thing. So this paragraph also talks about, you see the 120 days here, that we're holding the buyer to the terms of this buyer broker agreement for any property that they have seen during the time that we have had this buyer broker agreement in place. If they go back to it 120 days after the expiration of this agreement to go buy that property because they didn't want to pay us, but we showed it to them, we are the procuring cause, they are subject to this buyer broker agreement. All right. So if we see a house today and our buyer broker agreement expires tomorrow, and then next week they go and put an offer on that house and close on it, we showed them that house. So they are liable to pay us the 3% commission as agreed in this form. All right, but we'll have more conversations about how compensation works, but we need to start talking about compensation. One of the expressions that we at Johnson & Burge are going to start using, we learned from Adorna Carroll in her buyer agency class at Hurrah a couple weeks ago. we need to stop talking about it as commission, right? Commission is kind of a nasty word in the public sphere right now because of the commission lawsuits, right? But if we talk about it the same way that a CPA talks about it, that an attorney talks about it, what we are getting paid, what we're asking for in this compensation paragraph is fee for professional service. It has a nice ring to it, right? Makes us sound really important. Makes us sound professional, which is what we need to be. So instead of commission, let's call it fee for professional service, right? Nobody haggles with the orthodontist about how much it's going to cost there. Nobody haggles with the attorney about how much it's going to cost to get the divorce. No one haggles with the CPA on how much it's going to cost to file the taxes, right? So fee for professional service.
I have a question,
Okay.
not to get on a tangent, but it stays on the commission. It just pertains to the listing side of things. Is it appropriate or ethical or any of the above to refer to the listing commission as, you know, obviously you can say it's a fee for professional service too, but, you know, historically, or at least the premise for this lawsuit was that sellers thought they were paying the opposing side to compete against them. That was kind of the whole initial argument. And if I'm not mistaken, that's our fee, and we are choosing to use half of it to market the property, and it also happens to go to the other firm. So is that a fee that they're even paying the other firm? Technically, it really isn't in my thought process. That's our fee, and that's how we're using it to bring other buyers and buyers agents to the property.
Yeah, so the buyers have always paid the buyer's agent commission indirectly
Right.
to their mortgage and the generation of the seller's net proceeds or the seller's proceeds on the sale. And what all of the lawsuits seem to have lost is that all of these sellers signed some form of a listing agreement saying that they're going to pay the listing firm X%. And then, especially in our listing agreements, it says that we're going to charge you, say, 6%, then we're going to give 3%, half of that, to the other side.
Yeah, but that's
Or,
our decision. Ultimately, we're disclosing it,
right.
but technically that's us paying, not
That
them.
is,
That's
That's
amen.
the listing firm paying it out, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
yeah.
But that's a whole bag of worms in and unto itself.
Okay, back
but-
on topic.
So let's get back to the form here. So paragraph 6 is dual and designated agents. This is where we need to explain that the likelihood that we may, as a Long and Foster buyer's agent, see a Long and Foster listing is possible, right? And tell them this is where we're just educating that they're not agreeing to this right now. They're just saying, okay, I understand what this is, because guess what? We have another form if it actually materializes, but we need them to know this is all education for the buyer, right? So if I have a buyer for Donna's listing, right, that's designated agents. Long and Foster, the company, is the dual brokerage, and Long and Foster, the company, is designating me as the buyer's agent and Donna as the listing agent for this transaction, and everyone has to agree to it. Now, there is the possibility that I have a buyer that comes along that matches perfectly with one of my listings, right? That's dual agency, where I individually am on both sides, and I've done this from time to time. Dual agency may be something that goes by the wayside in the next round of lawsuits and things like that. But for now, if you're going to do dual agency, please, for the love of God, talk to Tina, talk to me to make sure that you are covering your buttocks, because dual agency is where a lot of agents get into trouble very quickly, right? If you think you're the most ethical agent, you think you're the most honorable agent, you have to double it, triple it, quadruple it when you have dual agency. You have to be totally transparent and above board. I have literally brought people to the conference room table, buyers and sellers face to face, and we talk it out face to face in the open. And I'm there sort of mediating and refereeing the conversation so that everyone has their input. Because the challenge with dual agency is, private information about each party, and you can't disclose that to anyone else's advantage. So you have to have a way to have conversations with them that makes them understand that you're bringing as much as you can to light, you're guiding them as best you can, and you're helping them advocate for what they want, whether they're the seller or the buyer, right? There is a nuance to this. But for this purpose, this form is just describing what it is, educating them. And then if it happens, we'll say, okay, timeout. We're now in a dual or designated representation situation. If you'd like to proceed, please sign this form. Okay. Number 7, a whole big paragraph about disclosure regarding dual agency, right? And we just hit upon that a little bit with, okay, there's another form that we have to use to generate the permission to do these things. Paragraph 8, recordings within the property. So this cuts 2 ways, right? So this specifically says that before you as an agent, before the buyers photograph, video telephone, like Zoom or FaceTime or whatever, the property, you have to have, number 1, the seller's permission, the owner's permission. And it says here, the buyer should probably speak with an attorney. That's a bit of a high bar, but we're disclosing that before they do that, they may want to consult and see what their legal rights are to record in the property. Now, the next line says that the buyer should be aware that the seller may have a security system that records or allows for remote monitoring of the property. How many people have walked up to the front door and you practically slap your hands over the buyer's mouth because you see a Ring doorbell or something like that? We have to have these conversations with our buyers that, we really shouldn't be recording in the property without permission. And the sellers may be recording things that are going on in the house. And sometimes you see the cameras and sometimes you don't. So always conduct yourselves under the notion that you are being monitored. Big Brother is watching you. You are being recorded. Advise your buyers that we're going to go through every property kind of stone-faced and emotionless. They can still have conversations like, ooh, look at the size of this closet. I had one yesterday, condo over in South Norfolk, that I was just absolutely gobsmacked at the amount of storage space in this 2-bedroom condo. There were 2 closets by the front door. There was a fairly large laundry closet. There was a broom closet, for lack of a better word, in the hallway, plus a linen closet, 2 closets each in each bedroom. I'm like, so that's something that it's not going to give away a bargaining position if we say, oh my gosh, look at all this storage space. Who would have thunk? A 2-bedroom condo has like just as much square footage in the closets as it does living space. But if the buyers start to get excited, like, oh my God, this is the one, we've got to have this house, that may give away their bargaining position. So you want to be careful about things that the buyers say in the house. If you have the conversation outside, move away from the Ring doorbell, move away from the camera over top of the garage, go to the end of the driveway. If you all rode together in the car, talk in the car, right? Take a few minutes and just say, okay, what did we think about that one? Oh my God, it smelled like dog. Well, at least it didn't look like a dog. We can change the carpet, things like that. We can have those conversations, but have those privately. Miscellaneous. This is an important paragraph because this says that we are just a lowly real estate agent. We're not an attorney. We're not a tax advisor, lender, appraiser, surveyor, structural engineer, home inspector, or anything like that. Nor do we play any of these people on TV, right? unless we have experiential knowledge in a field, we cannot advise, right? Now, we can give examples of experiences that we've had, but we always need to defer to the structural engineer. We need to defer to the lender, right? I'm famous for saying, you know what? I could see how this might work a number of ways with the financing. Let's talk to Kim. Let's talk to John. That's the money people. What I know about mortgage can fit in a small glass. We need to go talk to the money people and the mortgage people to make sure we're doing it right, kind of thing. We've all been through home inspections where it's like, well, we've seen this before, but we want to say, okay, well, this would probably come up in a home inspection, but we'll talk to the inspector. Or once we have the home inspection, you know what? We had a roof issue, as you all know from the sales meeting recently. It's like, hey, we've seen this recently, and this is how it went. And we will get our roofer over here to give us an official opinion. But we can't say, oh my God, this roof is shot. We need to talk so this is where the English major in me comes out. We need to talk subjunctively about these things. The roof might be at the end of its life. It appears to be at the end of its life. I'm no roofer, but when the shingles start to curl, that's usually not a good sign. We should talk to a roofer, right? So we need to couch everything in terms of maybe, possibly, and then say, let's talk to a professional. Electronic signatures. I have a little red line on ours so that when we go through to tag things, we don't miss it, because this is a great spot to put something that you don't want taken care of, right? It's in the middle of a paragraph, kind of thing. And I honestly don't know what the legality of agreeing for the use of electronic signatures with an electronic signature, right? Because most of these things we do through AuthentiSign or DocuSign now. And I've always wondered, it's like, we're agreeing that we're okay using electronic signatures and we're signing electronically, and how does that work? But that has not come up in a court case yet, so we're just going to keep pushing through. Wire fraud alert, paragraph 11, again, for the buyer, tell them to be very careful. If anyone says, hey, just wire the money, right? If you use Shaheen Law Firm, they want to be on the phone with the buyer as they click send with the wiring instructions to say, okay, this is the wiring instructions. These will not change. You will call me if you receive different instructions, right? Because we have documented cases, even here locally, where people have changed their wiring instructions at the 11th hour right before closing and have lost tens of thousands of dollars. It goes off to some Nigerian prince or off to China or some, anonymous Russian hacker or something like that, and that money is gone. So just tell them, before you move any money around, talk to me, your agent, talk to the title company, talk to the mortgage lender, and make sure that it's legit, right? Don't do anything with your money unless you have my blessing. Other terms, this is where you cover your butt with FSBOs, right? So buyer shall allow agent to handle all contact, communication, and negotiations with for sale by owner, FSBO, or unrepresented sellers, right? Which is a fancy way of saying FSBO. Then the buyer signs, you sign, information is on page 3, and there we go. Any questions on the buyer broker agreement?
I do have a question that kind of just came up as we were talking
I
about.
saw you writing notes over there.
Yeah, I know, about the fee for professional service.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that that will ever be a part of the loan approval process? Because we need to know if they have cash on hand.
Mm-hmm.
So should we be asking Kim or having that as part of that process?
So we may want to start, this conversation of, with compensation, with the fee for professional service. If we see like a Ryan Homes listing and they're only paying what, $795 or something like that. I don't work for free. Do you have enough cash on hand to pay the commission? Because blame the company. Long & Foster is going to insist on getting paid for the work we do. And I know we've talked about before, Jenny and I had a buyer that they bought a Ryan home. These poor buyers, they were I think they woke up broke every morning and didn't have any money, and we had to suck it up and deal with the flat fee from Ryan Homes on that one, and effectively work for free. But, you know, that was a one-off, I hope, thank God. But yeah, we may need to talk with them. We've also had buyers that were interested in that famous River Road listing that is offering 0 as a cover. And, you know, we explained to them, they're not paying anything. So Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you're going to be on the hook for 3% for this.
I
And,
check that listing every day to make sure it's
Yeah.
not under contract.
and our buyers shot back to us in text, like, it's a nice house, but it's not that nice. We're not going to pay 3%, and then we have to pay commission on selling our home in Georgia, da, da, da. So it's like, okay, done. But here again, we talked with them about, this is how it might break down. If we get to that point and you're on the hook for some amount of the commission, then we'll work through it, right? And that's where we loop Tina into the conversation and work as a company to say, okay, how can we structure this? We'll probably loop Kim or John in on the mortgage side to say, okay, can we, you know, finance a portion of this? How do we structure that with the contract? Things like that. This is all somewhat new, right? But we've been here before buyer agency, you know, we had to fight and negotiate for buyer side commissions. So we're going to have to go back 30 years and talk to some of the old timers in the business to say, how did we used to do it? Can we bring some of those skills forward? But those are things that we're working on, and it's shifting. It's a day by day thing. So if we move on, the next set of forms.
I've got one more question. Did you write in this stuff on paragraph 12? Because I had one signed the other day and it didn't have that.
Yeah, I wrote it
The
in.
buyers. Okay, yep. I'm gonna
Anything
do
that's in that Courier font is what I wrote in.
Okay, cool.
Oh, and by the
I'm
way,
more of a Helvetica guy.
well, I use Couriers so that it can pop
Looks
up.
different.
All right, so I want to, while we're talking about money and things, let's go back to paragraph 5 here. So I see some people writing in 3% of the gross commission price of the property acquired by the buyer. What does this say? And/or, and then they put in the flat fee here. Check the box, the sum of $395. Linguistically, if we don't strike through or, the buyer could only be paying us $395, not the 3% that we're owed out of the listing, or the 3% that they're agreeing to pay us. They could say, well, I'm going with the or portion of that, and then only paying us $395. So that's why I have in here, and the box allows you to type it in, $395 plus 3%. Right? And I have that in the SAER, the Standard Agency Exclusive Right to Represent. Same box. They're going to pay flat fee plus 6% of the gross purchase price as listing commission, right? So be careful of these and or kind of things, right? And until I'm instructed not to do it this way by an attorney, by Nick D'Ambrosio, our principal broker, by Tina Holt, our managing broker, or, you know, the Supreme Court or whoever, this is how I'm going to do it, because logically, linguistically, grammatically, this is a lock. I don't want to have to deal with this and or stuff over here. Okay. So, and if I turn out to be wrong with this, I will let you all know that if I'm wrong, but I'm not wrong. Consumer disclosure information form. I'm going to rocket through this one just like you were a buyer. Okay. One thing I will say about this is we call this different things. I refer to it as the CDIF, Consumer Disclosure Information Form. I've heard some people call it CDIF, which, if you have spent any time in a hospital or with medical people, CDIF is not something you want to deal with, right? It's a horrible intestinal bacteria. And so let's just stick with CDIF. You know, it's not going to kill you. CDIF won't kill you. CDIF will. How about that? So speaking of killing you, this is where I'm going into my buyer presentation mode. This is the consumer disclosure information form. This is an advisory about pretty much all the ways your house can kill you. So we're going to jump right in. Agency interest disclosure. If you or I or anyone else in the deal were related to anybody, so if you, the buyer, and I were cousins, we would have to disclose that. If I had an ownership interest in a property, I would have to disclose it under law. So that's what agency interest disclosure is. We've already talked about in the buyer broker agreement, audio and video recording. You know, there might be recording devices in the home, and before we record anything and send a video back to mom and dad, we should have permission first before we do that. Community associations, right? Getting into now how your community can kill you. If a home is part of a property owners association or a condominium or co-op, we will have information that we have to discuss with you about what the rules are and how these transfer documents and things work. So this is just an advisory that some homes may be part of a property owners association, a condo association, or both. Dispute resolution. This paragraph says that before we all hire $500 an hour TV lawyers and go before Judge Judy on TV, we're going to go to non-binding arbitration. This does not abrogate your right to sue anybody. This just says that you are going to seek for dispute resolution before we have to go to court. Environmental disclosure. Did I mention your house may try and kill you? Here's a couple more ways. Indoor mold. Pretty much in Hampton Roads, with it being a warm, wet environment, have you seen the weather today? All homes have mold. They will develop mold at some point. If we have concern about whether it's an unhealthy mold or, God forbid, black mold, we can have it tested. More importantly, there may be mold or fungus in a crawl space, and that's where it's important to have a quality termite inspector to go in the crawl and evaluate those things. Lead warning statement. Homes built prior to 1978 may contain lead-based paint. If you haven't heard, ingesting lead is not good for brain development. My best advice to you is don't eat the woodwork. You should be fine. Wood preservatives. They use all kinds of horrible things, including arsenic, as wood preservatives, especially for like fencing and pressure-treated lumber and things like that. Here again, Hansel and Gretel, don't eat the house. You should be fine. Exterior insulation and finish systems, EIFS, we call that. This is that synthetic stucco stuff we see on the outside of a home. Not a lot of homes around here have them. Some do, and if we encounter them, we'll take extra steps there. Financing and insurance. Both for financing and insurance, it is your right as the buyer to use whoever you want to. I strongly encourage you to use the people that I've been working with for years because they know what they're doing and I know they can get it closed. And in the instance of the people affiliated with Long and Foster, we're all working for you to get you to the finish line. Flood hazard areas and flood insurance, you know, all of Hampton Roads is effectively a flood zone, right? Everything is pretty much at sea level. The good news is not every property is required to have flood insurance. And if it is, the lender will tell us, and that's when it gets to be really expensive. And we'll talk more about that if needed. If your home isn't required by the mortgage company to have flood insurance, I strongly encourage you to get it as an optional rider for your insurance policy because that optional policy is very affordable. And we can talk to Dawn Kay at Long and Foster Insurance for more information about that. Another type of insurance that you might be interested in is home warranty insurance. A home warranty covers the systems of the house. So if you have a home warranty in place and you are maintaining your home and taking care of your systems, for example, if the AC conks out or you wake up and you don't have hot water one day, a home warranty will cover repair of those systems. And we can talk more with Dawn Kay at Long and Foster Insurance about those. Lender and owner's title insurance. If you're financing a home, the lender is going to require you to pay for a lender's title insurance policy. I strongly encourage you to get the owner's title insurance policy, even though it's optional. Title insurance protects your ownership interest in the property in perpetuity, forever. You pay for it once as part of closing. It's very affordable as a percentage of the purchase price of the home. And this prevents any strange cousin or heir or something like that showing up on your doorstep and saying, this was my granddaddy's home. He promised to leave it to me. Look, I have it on a cocktail napkin where he swore he would get your owner's insurance title policy out and let the attorneys handle it. That's where you're covered. Land use. In case you haven't noticed, we have a lot of fighter jets flying over us, so you might have aircraft noise or accident zones to worry about. Even if you are outside of what we call the ACUS zones, you could still have a jet flying over your house. It doesn't say that if you're in the -65 noise zone or outside of the accident potential zone, it doesn't say you're never going to have a jet flying over you. It just says that there are areas where it's more likely to happen. And we'll point those out as we go along. Municipal regulation concerns. There may be zoning ordinances and things like that that restrict what you can do with your property, and we need to check with the city if zoning has any restrictions or something like that. Occupancy permits, this really only applies if someone has done a major renovation or it's new construction. The city has to sign off on the livability of the property with an occupancy permit. Building permits, this is a real stickler because we all know somebody that's Cousin Louie and a case of beer on the weekend and they like to do room additions. For any significant improvements, we want to make sure that there's a building permit on file. And oh, by the way, I see you have a nice sunroom here. Did you pull a building permit to do that work? Restrictive covenants, there may be certain neighborhoods or certain properties that have restrictive covenants built into the deed. If we discover these, we will look more closely into them and let you know what those restrictive covenants are. Transportation roadways, this is a great paragraph. This says that pretty much VDOT or the city will let you know that they're going to put a road through your house before they actually do. Parking permits, if you're in a condo community, certain parts of Norfolk or Virginia Beach or other older parts of cities may require parking permits for you to park either on the property or on the street in front of your house. Conservation, there might be a conservation easement on a property, or it could be something that is zoned by the city for conservation. If we find that that is the case, we will talk with our attorney to figure out how that may affect your ownership rights. Community development, a lot of this is saying the owner makes no representations. The owner makes no representations. Community development, this is where we talk about there may be an external governing body outside of the city that says, okay, we're going to control some aspect of this. Again, if this, whatever property you identify falls into this, we will look more into it. Rollback taxes. This comes up every now and again. If a zoning use for a property changes, there may be rollback taxes to pay, and we will negotiate as best we can to make sure that the seller pays them on behalf of you, the buyer, but just know that this may be part of a negotiation if it happens to pop up. Leases and management agreements. Doesn't really apply for most properties, as most of what we're seeing is not leased out, but just know that lease is attached to the property, not the owner. So if we find a property that you want to buy and there's a tenant in the property for any number of months, you may be buying a property with a tenant in it. So we will, again, look at that on a case-by-case basis. Mechanics liens. A mechanic is someone who does work on the house, a plumber, carpenter, electrician. If they're not paid, they have the right to file a lien against the property and attach the debt to the property in the courts and get their money that way. We try to make sure as part of the title search process when you're buying a home that all liens are cleared and paid as part of closing. But for example, if a plumber does work on the house as part of the home inspection prior to closing, they have 90 days from the last day of the month in which the work was done to file a lien. So you could be 90 to 100 days into your home and wind up with a lien notice. That's where your owner's title insurance policy comes into play. That's really important because if the sellers did $10,000 worth of work on the house just in order to sell it to you clean and they didn't pay, then that mechanic, that contractor is due that money. But again, this is where we work with quality title companies and attorneys to make sure that all debts are paid. Megan's Law disclosure, if you want to know where the weirdos live, there's a website and telephone number. Powers of attorney. We need to be very careful about powers of attorney. If you can't be here for closing, you need to have someone you trust assigned as power of attorney. I can't legally do that as your agent because you can't have a power of attorney for your own benefit. So this is where we need to talk with not only our attorney, but also the lender to make sure that the power of attorney that we're using fits in with the underwriting guidelines of the mortgage company. Polybutylene pipes, this is a favorite and people love to get scared about this one. Polybutylene piping was a flexible type of piping that existed from the sort of early-ish 80s to the early-ish 90s. There were some class action lawsuits against it. And my expectation is that most of the problems have worked themselves out by now. We don't hear as much about polybutylene as we used to. But if it does come up as part of the home inspection, we'll have more conversations about it, and especially about the generations of the piping and what is really worth worrying about. Property inspections, you don't have to have a property inspection to buy the home. I strongly encourage you to do so. Virginia is a buyer beware state, and it is incumbent upon you, the buyer, and by extension me, your buyer's agent, to learn as much as we can about the property before going to closing. School redistricting. The school zone for this property or any property may have been for the last 100 years this particular elementary school, and the day after you close, the city may say, okay, we're going to rezone, and you bought this home because of that school zone. We have no control over that. There's usually an input period from the public about school redistricting, and sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not, but we just need you to know that just because this has always been such and such high school doesn't mean that it will always be such and such high school. Septic tank and on-site sewage system. The vast majority of homes that we work with in Hampton Roads are attached to city sewer and city water. So really, we don't see a whole lot of septic systems or on-site sewage systems. If that's the case, it's probably going to be a rare occurrence in a more urbanized area or suburban area, or it's going to be a rural property. And again, if we get there, we'll take the action we need to learn as much as we can. Settlement service provider and settlement funds. It is your right as the buyer to use who you want for settlement. I strongly encourage you, again, to use the people that we know and trust and have used for years. They are great people, and we can have a conversation with them prior to committing to them. Smoke detectors. It's a good idea to have smoke detectors in a home. In fact, I'm going to go you one better and say that even if there are smoke detectors in a home, they should probably be replaced. They just go bad after a period of time, and especially, and I'm sure you've seen these, some of them are on the ceiling and they're kind of yellowy. They should probably be replaced. And I say this out of concern. I have firefighters in my family. I know some of the horror stories, and it's probably worth your time and money and a 9-volt battery to get a new smoke detector. Square footage, acreage, and other property measurements. All of these measurements and numbers are approximate. We could get 2 different appraisers in there and come up with 2 different measurement numbers for this 1,800 square foot home. If anything is drastically one way or the other, that's cause for concern. But if we have 2 different measurements and say the tax record says the property is 1,800 square feet, and the appraiser comes out and measures and they say, well, no, it's actually 1,750, that's close enough, right? Because it's approximate. Survey disclosure. By golly, we just had a class on this yesterday in my office, and I'm excited to talk to you about paragraph 20. You don't have to have a survey in order to buy a property in Virginia, although I strongly encourage you to do so, because we have seen instances and heard stories from our colleagues where someone built a shed or a room addition or something like that, and it's over the property line. And there have been instances where people have been forced to tear down detached garages that were just a few inches over a property line. So a survey is a great idea. We encourage you to get one, and we can talk to the attorney about how much that may cost you.
I showed a property yesterday in Bird Neck Lake, and the owner, up until about a month ago, did not know he had water frontage because their neighbor's fence kind of met up with the other side neighbor's fence. And in fact, his property extended out beyond his fence, a narrow strip, hung a left, and he had 9 feet of water frontage, and he did not know that for almost the entire time he lived there. And they all, gave it back to him, luckily, because, that could have been a easement of pertinence, I guess, or some sort of situation where, because they used it unchecked for over 12 or 15 years, they got to have it.
Right.
And that worked out. So that's a good story about, why survey is important.
And that was yesterday, right after the class.
Right. Paragraph 21, third-party contract approval. We don't see a whole lot of this these days, but there was a time, like from 2008 to 2012, where we had a lot of short sales, which were third-party contract approvals. The bank had to approve the sale on behalf of the seller. And that wasn't just a contract between buyer and seller like was what we usually do. If we come across that, we'll talk more about it. Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act. The seller's going to sign a form that basically says buyer beware, right? The only representations the sellers in Virginia are required to make is that the property is habitable, saleable, and insurable. And with insurable, that means title insurance, no encumbrance on the title. Habitable means that you can live in the property or it can be made to be livable. Saleable, they have every right to sell it, and that they are willing to give it over with clean title, and you can get title insurance for it. That's all they're saying, right? But some of the other things that the Residential Property Disclosure Act talks about, and we mentioned this as part of previous paragraphs here. Military air installations. We have fighter jets. They may fly over your home. Pending building or zoning violations. If someone has done a room addition or something like that, there may be an open building permit that we need to have closed. There may be a zoning violation we need to work with the seller on to fix that. We'll work through those as best we can. Lis pendens, this is a fancy Latin word meaning that there's litigation pending against an owner of the property. If the owner knows that there's litigation pending, they have to disclose that, and hopefully they do the right thing and do that. Permissive disclosure tourism activity zone. This is a new one for us. Guess what? There are a lot of tourists that come to our wonderful part of the state because it's so awesome here, and they want to come to the oceanfront resort area. They want to come in on a cruise ship to downtown Norfolk. So there may be some tourists around. There may be certain areas where it's going to be a little bit busier, or there may be some short-term rentals allowed. And again, we'll work on those as we come across them. Property previously used to manufacture methamphetamine. In my 20 years of doing real estate, I have not come across a former meth house, and I think that's wonderful news, but that doesn't mean that they're not out there. And the reason we have to disclose this, if we know, is because the chemicals involved in making meth can be harmful, and they sort of stick in the property, right? They don't just go away when the meth manufacturing goes away. So there needs to be a certain way to remediate that. Stormwater management facilities. This is something that has become very big in Hampton Roads because we're so low lying. We have increasing development on, pump stations and things like that that require a continual update and things like that. I had a listing once where the driveway was oversized because part of the driveway actually belonged to the city, and that granted access to a pump station that was kind of behind my listing. So just those kinds of things. It's good that you have a pump station next to your house, because that you're going to probably not have a flooding issue if anyone should arise, because that pump station is there to take care of you, but there's noise involved there. Repetitive risk loss. If a home has filed numerous claims for flood insurance, the seller is required to tell you. And if they don't, well, shame on them. The good news is that Dawn Kay at Long and Foster Insurance and most reputable insurance agents, when they pull the clue report on a property, they can see if there's a repetitive loss that's been filed. And we'll, again, have that conversation if we need to down the line. Now, this is where I pause to take a deep breath because we keep going. Water conservation ordinance and restrictions. Some of us that have been around Virginia Beach for a long time remember prior to the Lake Gaston pipeline in the 90s, we would have run out of water, right? And they would have restrictions about you can't water your lawns, you can't wash your cars, things like that, because we didn't have enough natural water in our reservoirs to take care of it. The good news is that we really haven't had those issues in recent years, but they may come up again, and we just need to know. Water frontage and rights. Speaking to Ryan's point about the survey, just because your property appears to front onto water may not mean you actually have water frontage, right? We have all seen a number of properties in Hampton Roads where the fence looks like it goes all the way into the water, and the grass is mowed by the owner, and it looks like it's water frontage. But there could be a strip along the water's edge that's owned by the HOA, or the property line could end at the water's edge, and the lake is owned by the city or another city. If you're on Lake Smith or Lake Lawson, Norfolk owns those lakes because they're reservoirs, and you own to the water's edge. Some places you actually own into the water. We've seen a number of places with canals and creeks and things like that where houses will own to the middle part of the river. And there comes some different restrictions with those kinds of things. If we get to waterfront property, we'll talk more about that later. Wood destroying insect infestation, woody and moisture inspection. If you are financing your property, it is going to be required that you have a termite and moisture inspection. You probably should have one anyway if you're paying cash or think it's not required, because guess what? Hampton Roads is a warm, damp environment, and termites love warm, damp environments. So hopefully the home doesn't have any wood destroying insects. Hopefully it doesn't have any fungus. If we get to that point in the home inspection and we find that, we will work with the seller for corrective action. Wire transfer, we've talked about this previously, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. Before you move any money around, stop. Take a moment. Let's verify that this is what should be done. Let's talk to the attorney's office. Let's talk to the title company. Let's talk to the mortgage company to make sure that where we're sending all of your money is exactly where it needs to be going, because we don't want it to wind up with a Nigerian prince or, some scammer in North Korea. We want to make sure that your money goes into your purchase. And that's the majority of the ways that your house can kill you. And this is the end. This is where I take a bow. Because our time is almost up, I won't go into the rest of the forms in this packet. They're fairly straightforward, right? It's the DPOR disclosure form, no physical inspection addendum. This is coming back. I'm under contract right now on one, no physical inspection. I did YouTube videos for the buyer, and he's buying it sight unseen, and we're all praying that he likes it when he gets here. The BRU form, we hardly ever use this anymore, but that's in there for your edification. Any questions? Are you all as tired as I am? That was a lot.
That was good, though. I love hearing it over again. The tiredness is the weather.
Yeah. So the thing is, as Jenny, you just said, the CDIF, it's a beast of a form, right? And you really do need to go over it, because buyers may have questions that they don't know about. And when you say termites, oh, I heard about termites. What do I need to know about termites? Well, then you start having a conversation about termites. Or I have buyers that came into town last week, and the husband grew up here. He knows what the jet noise is all about. The wife is from Pennsylvania, has never heard jet noise outside of like Norfolk Airport or DC Airport or something like that. And so when people move to this area, one of the things I really want to make sure they understand is that you may be buying a home, or you could be, remember Jan at Target one day at Hilltop, and a fighter jet screams overhead, right? Not everywhere in the world is like this, right? We're very special that we have a Navy base that's like right in the middle of the city, and people live in the flight paths and all of that. So we need to make sure that they know that. Hopefully the jets are flying while your buyers are looking, so they can experience that, because unless you've experienced it, you have no idea, right? So, things like that. So that's why that CDIF form is important to go over with them. And that's why I kind of make it a little lighthearted, is so that, we're not talking about, well, a jet could crash on your house, so that you need to know that. I mean, they're never going to buy a house if you go at it that way, right? If you talk about mold or lead warning statements, like, what, there are chemicals in your home that are going to kill you. Well, it's like, yes, but most of the time, just don't eat the house, right? They use formaldehyde in kitchen countertops, laminate countertops, as an adhesive, right? Formaldehyde is deadly. Don't ingest it, right? Everything that's sitting in formaldehyde in the lab is dead. Don't eat the countertops. You should be fine, right? Those are the kinds of things. So good conversations to have. We'll continue to have conversations about compensation and how to talk about compensation and fees for professional service. But for now, just make sure that we're getting back into buyer consultations, that we're talking with buyers and continuing to educate them, right? As you're driving along with them, showing them property, have conversations with them. Yes, we can talk about the property you just saw, but also remind them, like, hey, this property was built prior to 1978. Remember the form that we talked about? This is where one of those things, and there's a way to handle lead-based paint if you want to do any renovations, right? It's a constant conversation that you have with them. All right, any other questions?
you.
All right, then I am going to end it here. Thank you all very much, and
Thank
see you
you.
next time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.